Greetings in Christ, everybody, and welcome to Meet the Catechism. I am Steve Green, Director of Holy Family Institute of Catholic Faith and Life, and today we're talking about paragraph number 33. If you have not yet watched the Meet the Catechism on paragraphs number 31 and number 32, you might want to go back and watch those as a preparation for this one on number 33. Because paragraphs 31, 32, and 33 in the Catechism of the Catholic Church are under the heading Ways of Coming to Know God, and the three of them are interconnected, interwoven, kind of mutually illuminating. 31 sets up 32 and 33, 32 sets up 33, etc. So 33 is kind of the culmination. And then actually paragraph 34, and I might just read the first line or two of that one at the end here. Paragraph 34 then just kind of summarizes what 31, 32, and 33 had to tell us. So in paragraph 33, we are talking about the second primary way that we come to know God's existence simply from the natural world, simply from the created world, simply from the universe. And 2 points of departure, as paragraph 31 says. The first is the universe itself. The second, though, is the human person. And so, brothers and sisters, what paragraph 33 is going to make very clear to us is the most immediate and intimate evidence for the existence of God is the evidence for God's existence which confronts us every time we look in the mirror. Our own human nature, our very selves, are in a very real sense the most profound revelation of the existence of God. What do we mean by that? Well, let's get into paragraph number 33, and then we'll begin to dissect it a bit to see how the Catechism makes this argument. Okay, so paragraph 33. The human person, with his openness to truth and beauty, his sense of moral goodness, his freedom, and the voice of his conscience, with his longing for the infinite and for happiness, man questions himself about God's existence. Okay, so let's stop there for a second before we continue. All right, so I want you to notice a couple of things right off the jump. First of all, everything in our human nature participates in the image and likeness of God. We're created in the image and likeness of God. Everything about us as human beings, both our physical selves and our spiritual selves, and what's a single self, but both the physical component and the spiritual component of the human person, of human nature, more broadly speaking, is a participation and a reflection of the image and likeness of God. Okay, so that means that not only do we image God in our metaphysical just meaning above or beyond the physical or material. So not only in the spiritual element of the human person, but also in the physical element, in the biological element, in the bodily element, the material element of the human person, we reflect God. So in our bodies, we have, of course, that made for communion, complementarity between the sexes, the procreative capacity, which means that our bodies are not just biological realities, they're also theological realities. They reveal God in a very deep and intimate way in this communion of persons that our bodies speak to in their sexual complementarity and their procreative capacity. So the point that I just want to call our attentions to right off the jump here in paragraph number 33 is there's a pivot in paragraph 33. 31 and 32 are speaking, 31 is speaking generally about the fact that we can use our unaided reason to observe and experience the universe, and then to philosophize, to think logically and rationally about what we observe and experience, to come to know God, and to come to know God's existence with certainty just based on our rational intelligence applied to what we observe and experience in the universe. Then it's going to say there's those 2 points of departure, the universe itself, the physical world, and the human person. And then 32 talks about how we observe fundamental features in the structure of the universe that speak to the Creator, that speak to the existence of God. That's all so far general, and then physical and natural. Now we're going to pivot to the spiritual, because notice again this list of features of the human person, characteristics of the human person, characteristics of our human nature, our openness to truth and beauty, our sense of moral goodness, our freedom, free will, the voice of conscience in us, that which tells us that what we ought to do and ought not to do, our longing for the infinite and for happiness. In all of these ways, we question ourselves about God's existence. Notice, brothers and sisters, that list of characteristics that are woven into our human nature, that all human beings have in common, are all spiritual characteristics, metaphysical characteristics, characteristics above and beyond the physical. It's not our body that's open to truth and beauty. Although we receive beauty through our body, we see beautiful things, we hear beautiful things, we taste beautiful things. So our bodies are a means by which beautiful things are made present to our intellect. But it's our intellect that recognizes them as beautiful, as good, and our will that recognizes them as desirable, things to be sought, things to be attained and acquired. All right. Our sense of moral goodness. Again, we can use our body to perform moral acts, acts of kindness, charity, care for our fellow man, and we can use our bodies to, of course, perform acts of great immorality. We can murder and steal and lie, do violence to our fellow man. But our sense of moral goodness itself is not a physical thing. It's not as though moral actions are green and weigh 5 pounds 6 ounces each, and immoral actions are red and weigh 2 pounds 9 ounces. There are no physical characteristics to moral realities. Those are metaphysical realities. And it's a metaphysical power of intellect that allows us to know moral goodness and moral evil, and the metaphysical will, the spiritual power of will in us that allows us to choose the good, or unfortunately also sometimes choose evil. And then we see that we're free. We have free will. All matter, all material things are bound by the laws of physics. Matter doesn't disobey the laws of physics. It's not like one day the earth will just simply decide, you know what, enough already with this whole law of gravity thing. It was really bringing me down, man, pun intended. I'm gonna rebel. I'm free. I don't have to be pushed around by the law of gravity anymore. I'm just gonna reject it. I'm just gonna float off into space, break free of the orbit of around the sun, and go do my own thing in some other solar. No, of course not. All material things, all physical things, are rigidly bound by the laws of physics. Now notice, that's true of our physical bodies as well, but mysteriously, because our physical bodies as human beings are created in union with and formed by a spiritual soul, we can express and activate that freedom through our bodies. But we're still not free to disobey the laws of physics, right? So I could say, well, you know what? I agree with the earth. I also have a real problem with being bound by the law of gravity. I am going to disprove it. I'm going to show everyone that I am free of the law of gravity. And then I could climb up on a high cliff and I could throw myself off, intending to fly or float away. Now, of course, obviously, I would not, in that foolish attempt, contradict or triumph over or break free from the law of gravity. I would simply demonstrate the law of gravity to my own destruction and harm. So on the physical level, we're also subject to the laws of physics. And yet in this mysterious union of a physical body and a spiritual soul, we have powers over and above our physical powers, and our spiritual soul expresses itself and its freedom of will through our body. We act freely, we choose, we self-actualize by way of these choices. So we have free will. The voice of conscience, this mysterious thing in us which speaks at key moments when we're confronted with moral choice, which speaks to us at the very core of our being. And we'll talk more about conscience later. The Catechism takes it up in later paragraphs. So stay tuned for those. But at the core of our being is this little voice, which at those key moments in life where we have a true moral decision to make, it speaks to us, it advises us. We hear that little still small voice at the core of our being saying, don't do that. That would be an evil thing to do. Don't lie. Don't steal. Even though no one's looking, even though there's no practical physical consequence, I'm not going to get arrested and thrown in jail or beaten, by the person whose property I'm trying to see. There's a metaphysical reality which directs my will, another metaphysical reality, to the good and away from evil. Okay, so conscience, our longing for the infinite. There's nothing infinite in our experience. We have no physical contact with infinity. Infinity is a concept of limitlessness, but everything we experience physically in the universe is limited, is defined, is this rather than that, here rather than there. We have no direct physical experience of the infinite. So this longing for the infinite, for infinite life, everlasting life, is something that comes to us from outside of our physical experience. And the church is just saying, right, that's part of our spiritual longing, that we would continue after our physical life here on earth is over. And then for happiness, happiness is not a physical thing. A person is not happy because he has the requisite number of happiness atoms floating around in his body, or because he takes in some happiness substance into his digestive system. No, happiness can be triggered, can be activated by things that we experience in the physical world. A hug, the hug of a loved one, seeing something beautiful, having a great meal. Those can all trigger happiness in us. But of course, what the church is referring to here when it says happiness is not just pleasurable feelings or experiences. It means true happiness, actually better translated, perhaps blessedness, which is a virtuous appropriation of our human nature, a virtuous use of our human nature in such a way that we become good, that we fulfill the nature which has been entrusted to us. Okay, so all these elements of human nature point beyond the physical. Why am I stressing the fact that these are metaphysical, spiritual powers and characteristics of the human nature? Because matter cannot give what matter does not have. So if we as human beings in our very own human nature are truly possessed of metaphysical realities and characteristics, metaphysical powers and capacities like intellect, will, memory, imagination, if we have metaphysical experiences, emotions, conscience, all that kind of stuff, then that means there is something beyond and above meta, the physical universe. And it is that spiritual reality, that metaphysical spiritual reality, which gives to the human person and our own human nature these metaphysical, these spiritual powers. Now we call that spiritual reality God. Now, to the point here that's being made in paragraph 33, the next sentence, in all this, man discerns signs of his spiritual soul. Okay, I want to pause here for a second too. A lot to unpack in paragraph 33. Unsurprisingly, we're now looking at the most immediate, the most intimate contact we have with evidence for God's existence, our own human nature. So we've already said we find in our nature all these powers and capacities which are not material, therefore could not be the product of a merely material universe, but must be a gift of some spiritual reality, of some spiritual being. So these are powers of our spiritual soul. I want to begin by Aristotle defines soul, and he says every living thing has a soul, but there's three different orders of souls. Just a quick little sidetrack into philosophy here, but just to set the table for what the Catechism is saying and what we want to understand here in paragraph 33. Aristotle says every living thing has a soul. So this is plants, animals, and humans. Plants have what he calls the vegetative soul, which is the lowest in the order of souls and the least powerful, has the least capacity or perfection. So a vegetative soul simply enables plants to take and metabolize nutrients and then to reproduce according to their kind. But they have no real sense experience of the world around them, or at best a very minimal sense experience, like flowers turning towards the sun. But even that is reducible to simply this ability to reproduce. Then you move up a level to the animal soul, or the sentient soul, a soul which does interact with its surroundings by way of its senses, right? So predators sense their prey, preys sense the predator. And in the struggle for survival, of course, there's these competing sense realities in animals. So the sentient soul is the soul that is able to do everything the vegetative soul does. It also enables the animal to take in nutrients, metabolize them, to reproduce according to its kind, but also to be able to interact through its senses with the world around it, and then to move itself by way of the instincts built into its sensory capacities through the world around it as well. But then the highest soul is the rational soul, containing all the powers of the vegetative and the sentient soul, the soul of plants, soul of animals, but with this great and mysterious addition, the addition of rational intelligence, the capacity to reason, and by way of the capacity to reason, the ability to know the world around it and to know itself. And this is the soul of the human person. So what the church says is, so Aristotle looks at these three different orders of soul: vegetative, sentient, and rational, or plant, animal, and human. Then he just says, what do all of those souls have in common? What is the simplest definition of a soul, no matter of which order? He says the soul is that principle which gives life and unity to a body. Think about that for a second. It's deceptively simple. It's extremely profound and perceptive on Aristotle's part. The soul in any living thing is that principle which gives life and unity to its body. So the soul of a plant gives life and unity to the plant. The soul of an animal gives life and unity to the body of the animal. And the soul of the human person gives life and unity to the human body, but with that additional power of reason, rational intelligence. Okay, so the human soul is a spiritual soul. That rational intelligence is a spiritual power, the power of intellect and will, the ability to know and to choose and to act freely, to self-actuate, which is not a power animals have and not a power that plants have. So that means that we have a spiritual soul, because those are spiritual powers, metaphysical powers, the power of intellect and will, knowing the truth, willing the good. Which means that the human soul is the only soul which is a spirit. Now, remember that in the created order, there are also created spirits, angels. But angels are not souls. Angels are pure spirits. They do not give life and unity to a body. Angels have no bodies. Our souls, our spirits, our souls. Our spiritual soul gives life and unity to a human body. So we are the only soul which is a spirit. The animal souls and plant souls are not spiritual souls. They don't have the powers of intellect, will, and freedom. And we're the only soul. So we're the only soul which is a spirit. We're also the only spirit which is a soul. God does not have a body until he assumes a human nature. And the created spirits, the angels, don't have bodies either. So we're this interesting microcosm of the universe. We contain in our human nature both the physical and the spiritual. And we unite the two of them in one single human nature. Okay. So then goes on to say the soul, the seed of eternity we bear in ourselves, irreducible to the merely material, can have its origin only in God. This is a very significant point. Only God can create spirits. God, who is himself spirit, the divine spirit. Only God can create spirit, which means that the human soul can only be created by God. The spiritual human soul cannot be produced by matter. Our bodies do not generate our souls. Rather, our spiritual souls are created immediately by God and created in union with our bodies, the physical matter, which becomes our bodies as we develop and grow. And it is the soul which forms our body, forms and informs our body. We have a human body because it inhabits a human soul. The soul forms the body. Okay. So if matter cannot make a soul, a spiritual soul, and we have a spiritual soul, and we know that we do by virtue of the fact that we have these spiritual powers which cannot come from matter, but has to come from spirit. So if we have a spiritual soul, that means that the thing which created us, which caused us, which gave us this human nature, is itself spiritual, and this is God. So when we look at our own human nature and we see the spiritual powers and capacities, our openness to truth and beauty, sense of moral goodness, our freedom, the voice of our conscience, our longing for the infinite and for happiness, for blessedness. When we recognize that we have a spiritual soul, which gives human form and human powers and capacities to the matter of our physical bodies, and that the soul cannot be produced by matter, we recognize the only possible explanation for the human person, for our human nature, is God, an eternal, uncreated spirit who creates us in his own image and likeness as a person. And so this also tells us that God is a person, that God is a personal God. He's not some blind, abstract spiritual force, but he is a personal spirit. And so we are persons because God is a person, and he imparts personhood to us. His personhood is eternal, divine, all-powerful, all-knowing. Our personhood is finite, created, limited. But yet in our personhood, we truly image the God who created us, and mere matter is simply insufficient to explain the spiritual realities of the human person. That is paragraph number 33. And I said I was just going to read paragraph 34, then summarizes 31, 32, and 33. So here's what paragraph 34 opens with. The world and man attest that they contain within themselves neither their first principle nor their final end. Meaning, nothing about the world or our human nature is a sufficient explanation for why we exist or the reason for our existence. That can be found only in God, who is in fact our source and our destination, our origin and our end, our Alpha and our Omega. All right, we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Keep coming back for more Meet the Catechism videos. Please feel free to subscribe so that when we release new Meet the Catechisms, you get them right away. Feel free to share them as well. We're always glad to have people putting this project on other folks' radar. And in the meantime, remember, the church has what the world needs, so learn your faith, live your faith, and share your faith.